Ich hatte das Gefühl, ich trete aus meinem Körper aus.
I had the feeling that I was stepping out of my body from the front and getting really big, as if I were expanding. At that moment I was scared, because suddenly I could see everything around me. I could look down, I could look up, but I could also look behind me, as if I had eyes. I saw my little body lying down there, but I didn't feel like a child.
Frau Ahmed, Sie sind sechsfache Mutter, Kinderintensivkrankenschwester.
Ms. Ahmed, you're a mother of six, a pediatric intensive care nurse, and you're convinced of life after death. Not only because you experienced impactful after-death contacts after your mother's death, but above all because you had a near-death experience yourself as a child at the age of 8. I'd like to start with that. How did it come about? What can you still remember?
Also ich kann mich sehr gut daran erinnern, als wäre es nur ein paar Monate her. Es hat mich mein ganzes Leben begleitet.
I remember it very well, as if it was only a few months ago. It has been with me all my life. I was 8 years old, had severe pneumonia, a very high fever, and the antibiotics had not worked. I see myself lying in my parents' bedroom, and I had the feeling that I was stepping out of my body from the front and getting really big, as if I were expanding. That moment I was scared because suddenly, it's very hard to describe, I could see everything around me. I could look down, I could look up, but I could also look behind me as if I had eyes. I saw my little body lying down there, but I didn't feel like a child. I was me, but I didn't feel like a child anymore. And I thought, oh God, what's happening now? Then I saw a bright light coming towards me, but I did not experience a tunnel. The light came to me. The balcony door was open, so I had the feeling that the light was coming in from outside. Could have been the evening sun, but this light was communicating with me. It said, "Do not be afraid," just like in the Christmas Gospel. I am always there, and I will always be there. At that moment I became very calm, and I felt infinite love. There was a lot of love coming from that light. You can't describe it in words. I heard it. I was still me. The child's body was under me on the left. I almost flew to the ceiling. I had a kind of body too, but it was somehow transparent. I felt very big. This light then spoke to me. It was full of love. I said, "Then I'll stay with you now." And then he said to me, "No, you still have a lot to do in your life." That was remarkable. You will do a lot of good for children. I could still cry because that shaped my life. At that moment it faded away. I was pulled back into my body. My mother came in, shook me and said, "Christiana, wake up, wake up." My grandma came in too. Then my grandma said, "We have to put her in a cold tub and a hot tub." They were scared and thought I would very probably die. My uncle is a doctor. He came later and gave me an injection. When everything had calmed down, I told my mother about it. I always received understanding from my mother. She said to me, "I believe you. Yes, of course, that was your guardian angel." Then she told me that she once had a pulmonary embolism. She told me this in a child-friendly way. Later, when I was older, she told me again in detail. At that time, she was 28 and in hospital. It was a matter of life and death for her. That's when she met my father, by the way, who was visiting his mother. And there she also had a near-death experience. She found herself in her grandparents' garden, smelling the flowers. That made a deep impression on me. I was just relieved that they believed me, because of course I thought they wouldn't believe me.
Your mother called the figure an angel. You yourself speak of a he. Did you perceive the light as a shape?
Yes, to some extent. It's like looking into the sun, but it's not blinding. As I recall, I saw a shadowy figure. I call him Karl, I don't know why. The name came out that way. Quite often, when I was sad in situations, I've experienced some things in my life that have shaken me. Karl was present. I was once in Lebanon and had some experiences there. Karl was always there and eased my fears. A contact remained.
You mentioned, "I didn't feel like a child anymore." Can you describe that in more detail?
It's hard to describe. When I left my body, I no longer felt like a child because I was growing so big. I became twice as big as the small body that was below. At that moment, I also thought like an adult. And questions, thoughts flashed up. How far away is Venus? Or is there life on Jupiter? Answers always came. I learned about distances and that the universe is not endless. All my questions were answered. It was as if I were an adult, maybe a 40-year-old woman.
Ja, es war so, als wäre ich erwachsen, vielleicht wie eine 40-Jährige oder so.
It's very hard to describe.
That is, you felt secure in some knowledge, but it definitely involved questions that you wouldn't ask as a child.
Yes, questions that a child would not ask. That's it exactly.
I'd like to mention one more detail of your experience. You saw your body lying there, but at the same time you had the feeling of having a body yourself. Can you describe it a little?
Ja, ich hatte einen Körper, der aber federleicht ist. Also,
yes, I had a body, but it was light as a feather. I had the feeling that the body was one with the universe, with everything.
Wenn ich mich betrachtet hatte, hatte ich auch
I also had hands and arms.
Aber alles war so. Ich hatte sogar auch eine Art Kleidung an, wenn ich.
I even had a kind of long dress on and felt good in it.
Und ich fühlte mich darin gut. Ich hatte einen Körper.
I had a body, but not like this physical one here. But light, rather milky, not transparent.
Can you tell us anything else about how you felt about the near-death experience?
Yes, I felt safe and endlessly loved.
erlebt. Es war so, als wenn ich
It was like meeting a family member again,
treffen würde. So, und,
like knowing each other.
Und er nahm mir die
He also
Angst.
took away my fear.
Eigentlich wollte ich bei ihm bleiben, weil
Actually,
ich
I
so
wanted
viel,
to stay with him because I
wissen
still
wollte.
wanted
Ich
to
hatte so
know
viele
so
Fragen
much.
über das Universum
I had so
und
many questions
die,
about the universe,
ja, die
the
Entfernung
distance of
von
each
den
planet and so on.
Planeten und so weiter. Und dann fing er an zu lachen.
Then he
und er
started
sagte, "Wir haben
laughing
nicht
and
so viel
said,
Zeit.
"We
Wir
don't have that
müssen
much
zurück."
time, you have to go back."
Und ja, er lachte so.
He
Und,
laughed and I
ich
said,
sagte,
"Yes,
ja,
but
aber
when will I
wann
know all
erfahre ich
this?
das alles? Du wirst das
You'll
alles noch
find out
erfahren,
all
denn ich werde
about
immer
it
bei
because
dir
I'm
und
always
werde
with you
immer bei dir bleiben.
and I'll
So,
always be
und,
with you."
ja, er lachte
And
und
he
das war mir
laughed.
auch absolut
That took away all my
Angst.
fear.
Und ich fragte dann nämlich noch, so tut das denn weh?
I
wenn ich
asked him,
jetzt
"Does it hurt if I
weil
have
ich
to go
fühlte mich
back
ja so
now?"
groß. Und ich konnte
I
mir
felt
gar
so
nicht vorstellen,
big and
dass
I
ich
couldn't
auf einmal
imagine
so
that I would
klein
suddenly have to go
wieder
back to this
ich war
small
auch immer
body.
klein, bin ich ja heute noch.
I was always small, I still am.
Körper da zurück, so, und
He
dann hat er
laughed and
gelacht
said,
und da sagt er,
"Look,
pass auf, das
it happens
passiert ganz
automatically."
automatisch und schwupps war
And
ich da auch
suddenly I
dann
was
wieder
back in
drin.
it.
Nur dann
I was
kam,
back
es
in
war
my
auch so,
body.
ich war wieder
My
in
mother
meinem
and my
Körper, meine
grandmother had
Mutter
screamed
ja
and
geschrien
shaken
und meine
me,
Oma auch.
and
Und
then
ich
it was as
berührte
if I
und dann
took
war
a
es so,
very
als wenn ich
deep breath.
ganz tief Luft holen würde.
For a
Also
moment, my
meine Mutter
mother
war
was
auch
firmly
fest davon
convinced that I
überzeugt, dass
was
ich
dead.
kurz tot war, sozusagen. Ja.
That is, you had a sense of lightness. It was also humorous.
Ja, humorvoll,
Yes, humorous, light, happy
glücklich
even.
sogar.
Were you brought up religiously? Did you have a connection to religion as a child?
Yes,
Auf jeden
definitely.
Fall.
In what way?
Also meine Großeltern sind
My grandparents are
katholisch.
Catholic.
Meine Mutter
And my
hat
mother always
uns
brought
immer
us up
im
to believe there is the good
Glauben
Lord, there is
erzählt,
heaven.
es gibt den lieben Gott, es gibt den Himmel. Und,
But we didn't go to church every Sunday.
Jetzt jeden Sonntag in die Kirche gegangen sind, aber wir sind
My sister and I were brought up to be religious.
meine Schwester und ich, und
That shaped us also in charity, to be there for others and to have respect for creatures, for animals. My mother loved animals more than anything, even those in the garden. When the hedgehog came, the cat food was put out for him. All the birds were fed. My mother taught respect not only for people, for creatures in general, for creation.
You were able to talk to your mother not only immediately about your near-death experience, but also later when you were 14.
Yes.
Could you find parallels between what you experienced and what your mother told you?
Yes. She also described the bright light that had picked her up. Then she was in her grandparents' garden and had this keen sense of smell. I didn't have that, but I was a small child of 8. I didn't have any memories of smells yet. I encountered this later during certain after-death contacts. My mother also had the connection with the light. Only she saw her deceased grandfather who had taken her into the garden. That's how she described it. And we had often, since I was 14 or 15, talked about things like that. I'd always wanted to be a nurse ever since I was so sick when I was 8. My mother had given me a children's nurse set for my birthday to play with a cap and stethoscope. My teacher at grammar school had said, "You can be a doctor too." No, I wanted to be a nurse. Then I used to dress up and treat my teddy bears. Later, my sister and family members. I always had the need to help others, to be there for others. My mother also confirmed that I was able to comfort others who were sad because someone had died at an early age. I was maybe 9 years old when our neighbour's husband died. My mother was sitting on the terrace with this neighbour who was crying bitterly. I'd been playing in the garden. I came to her, hugged her and said, "You don't have to be sad at all because he's not dead." At first my mother was shocked that such a small child was talking to a grieving neighbour. And then she looked at me and said, "Thank you. Thank you, my child." That was an experience that made me think, yes, I have to comfort other people.
After all, your career aspirations came true.
Exactly.
You told me in the run-up to this interview that, as a child, you had repeatedly experienced expansions of consciousness, especially during illnesses.
Yes.
Can you describe an example that you can remember?
Yes. Every time I was ill and had a high fever, I was able to exit my body. And Carl was also always present. But I never had a tunnel experience. I experienced this life that I already knew. At this level, you don't protest either. Everything happens in love. I refer to him as Carl, my companion. He said, "You know you have to go back again and again until we meet again for good sometime." I had experiences like that again and again for a long, long time until I was an adult.
Have you ever been involved professionally with other children who have had spiritual experiences?
Yes, indeed. I once had an experience with a child who was seriously ill with leukemia. It was certain that she was going to die. I had and still have to deal with terminally ill children. The child used to draw a black balloon. Then I asked Elisa, she was 4 years old, "Why are you always drawing a black balloon?" "That's me, but Mummy is holding it so tightly." I asked her, "Should I talk to your mummy?" She said, "Yes, you should talk to Mummy because there's nothing to be afraid of." Elisa had also mentioned her aunt. "Aunt Anya is already here. She's coming to pick me up. I don't need to be afraid." A 4-year-old child. Then I spoke to the mother. She started crying bitterly and said, "Yes, I know, I'm holding her." And then she said, "She can't know Aunt Anya at all. Anya died in a traffic accident at the age of 21 or 22. But the child's statement convinced the mother that there is something between heaven and earth that we cannot explain. The child kind of comforted the mother and made her let go. Then the mother spoke to little Elisa. "I'm no longer the black balloon. I'm now the pink balloon. You can fly to Aunt Anya with the pink balloon." About 18 hours later, the child was dead. That touched me greatly.
Your mother died in 2019, if I'm correctly informed. You had a very intensive contact with her and had many, also spiritual, conversations. How did you experience the death of your mother?
It was already a big shock. My mother was a rock. Not only for me and my sister, but also for my children. She had a very close relationship with my children and supported me a lot in life, so that I could do my education and my studies despite having 6 children. She made it possible for the children all to go to a private school, the Leibniz School. There they had regular school hours from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m, sometimes until 6 p.m. if they had sports. When we got the news from the police that my mother had died, she had fallen. It was quite terrible. Even if you're firmly convinced that she is doing well. The doctor told me that my mother had a cardiac arrest. There was blood everywhere in the house because she hit her body. The doctor comforted me by saying that my mother had not consciously experienced the impact, because that was what I had feared. On the day my mother passed away, I was sitting in the kitchen with my children. At that time, we lived in another house with a very large kitchen living room. My mother also loved cats, and I grew up with cats. On the windowsill in the kitchen, there had been a picture of her cat for 4 years. She had given it to me once. The cat's sister lives with me. Then I said to my children, what are we going to do with Barney? Should we take him in? But then he would have to get along with the other cats, and he's already getting old. Or should he stay with Ulla? Ulla was my mother's neighbour, who had always lovingly looked after my mother. That moment, this picture, which had stood in the same place in the kitchen for 4 years, fell to the floor. We were immediately convinced that my mother was present. That's when I said, Grandma helped decide that now. It stays with Ulla. Ulla also agreed. Since then, this cat has been living with Ulla and is happy and content. We didn't have to take him out of his territory, out of his environment. That was the first after-death contact.
So, there were others?
There were others. My mother was laid out in the chapel the next day. The police had released her body in the meantime. We wanted to see her again and visit her. My son Tarek said he couldn't. He wanted to remember Grandma the way he knew her. Tarek had a very intense relationship with my mother. When he was little, I was away from home a lot for further training, and he was with my mother during the week during that time, for about a year or 2. He could also go to a nearby kindergarten, and at weekends he was with me. He had his own room at my mother's, and there was a music box at our house that you could wind up. When he was sad or homesick, my mother would take this music box to play the melody for him. This music box was in my mother's bedroom, where she also fell and died. Tarek was cleaning up all the blood and cleaning the flat. After all, a death like that is a shock. And no one else cleans the room. You have to do it yourself. Tarek really wanted to do it. It is very hard at the age of 20, but he wanted to do it and spend time alone in the house again. We came back from the chapel. Tarek was sitting on my mother's bed. It took a while before he was responsive. He said, "Mum, I have to tell you something. Please sit here on Grandma's bed. We need to talk about this." I'm telling this now in Tarek's words. "Mum, I was crying bitterly, and since there was no one in the house, I could scream and cry everything out of me. Amo," they always said Amo, not Grandma, "why have you gone already? We still need you." And I cried bitterly. At that moment, the music box started to play by itself. It didn't fall down, it just played.
Und das erzählt kein
A 20-year-old young man doesn't invent things like that. Then I took him in my arms and said, "Look, Amo is still here." And he said, "Yes, Mum, she comforted me with this music box." He tells everyone that too, whether they want to hear it or not. His grandma comforted him from beyond death. She was there, she was still there.
Wer hat sonst diese Spieluhr? Also, ist auch nicht runtergefallen, dass es dadurch dann losgeht, sondern sagt,
he says, that music box played just like this, ding, 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 one after the other. That was his comfort.
So then you also tried to make contact with your mother through a medium. Did that succeed?
Yes, it was successful. I wrote to Rita after my mother passed away, and she said to me, "It's always good to wait for a year or so."
Es ist immer gut, wenn man fast ein Jahr wartet. So, und dann bin ich im Frühjahr, das war, ich glaube, 4. Mai, bin ich.
And then I went. I think it was on the 4th of May in the spring of 2020, at the beginning of the Corona period, to see Rita. It was a very warm encounter. After all, there are people with whom you immediately feel a warm connection. We still have this connection. We write via WhatsApp, we talk on the phone. The connection has become friendly. When Rita makes contact as a medium, she writes it down, and you then receive this note. She said something to me that she couldn't have known because I only spoke to her about my mother when we made the appointment. Your mum is there and also your uncle. His name is Heinz. That's right, my uncle's name was Ernst Heinz, but everyone called him Heinz. And he's showing me a deer. I had to laugh and said to Rita, "Of course he'll show you a deer. He was a hunter and forester." And she continued, "He tells me he never believed there was such a thing, that you'd see each other again and so on." I sat there in a big armchair. The two of them were behind me, according to Rita. And then she said, "Oh, and Aunt Martha's there." I never thought of my aunt. She could name them. I said, "The last time I saw Aunt Martha was when I was 4 or 5. She died then. She lived in a high-rise building in Pinneberg. My mother, my sister, who was 12 years older, and my grandma cleared out Aunt Martha's flat." Aunt Martha tells you what you saw in the dining room that had already been cleared out is the truth. Then I remembered back. It was true. I'd seen Aunt Martha dimly in the corner in the cleared-out dining room at that time, but I'd forgotten about it because I had carried on playing.
So that was an after-death contact back then?
Exactly. And Aunt Martha said to me now, when I was at Rita's, "What you saw then was true." You have to imagine that. I didn't remember that at all. Then my father also showed up. And my mother said, "You see, whatever we were convinced of, whatever we talked about, it's true."
Wovon wir immer überzeugt waren, wo wir auch immer drüber gesprochen haben, das entspricht der Wahrheit.
For me, it was a confirmation that Rita could give names and details. I was very, very touched by that. I'm infinitely grateful to her for that. We also spoke to each other several times in between, also about Tarek's after-death contacts. Later, I also had experiences with birds and butterflies, and I called her again and told her that I kept having after-death contacts. She said, "Isn't that beautiful?"
Please tell us what else you experienced.
My mother and grandmother loved the garden, and the muse, poems, animals. We always enjoyed watching the birds in the garden from the dining room side. We had a beautiful garden with birdhouses and so on. There was a throng of birds sometimes. It was in September 2020. I'd been working in a closed ward for drug-addicted youths who were housed there under a court order. No one can get in, no one can get out. Even the windows are secured. I came on duty early in the morning at 6. The sun was already up. Behind me was a young colleague. All of a sudden, that glittering light I knew from Carl was there again. My mother also loved butterflies. Tortoiseshell and peacock butterflies were always on our summer lilacs. My mother loved them more than anything. Suddenly, there were 2 tortoiseshell and 2 peacock butterflies. I was bathed in this light, and the butterflies flew 4 rounds about me. A young colleague, he was maybe 24 or 26 years old, watched this in awe, but didn't dare enter. He was a witness, he saw it. The animals flew around me. It was a time of professional reorientation for me. I was not doing well. I didn't know whether I should continue or change jobs again. In this uncertainty, the butterflies gave me comfort. They then flew out through the airlock leading to the closed department. My colleague said, "My God, Christiane, do you know what I just saw?" I said, "Did you see it?" And he said, "Yes, you were suddenly golden, glowing, a glittering light. And there were butterflies flying around you and into the doorway." I said, "Yes, and I know who that is too." "Who is that?" "In a closed psychiatric ward, you have to be careful what you say." But I said openly, "That's a sign from my grandma and my mama." The young man said, "Yes, I can believe that too. It was so impressive. I believe in that now too." That was not the only experience. It gave me comfort because I knew I was not alone and that my decision, which I had already made inwardly to change careers once again, was probably the right one. I don't want to say that I had to deal with bullying, but there was a leader there who was very unfair to me. I think in retrospect he was jealous because the young people loved me very much, and maybe saw me as a mother. Of course, there are nurses in psychiatry who work there for over 30, 40 years and are as tough as nails. One of them often said to me, "You won't get anywhere here with love." I said, "Yes, if you can't work with love, what can you use to get ahead?" I always had differences and thought, "Oh, then let him continue in his way. After all, I'm going to move to another job." I was in the ward kitchen. It's a huge kitchen. Next to it is the dining room for the young people. Of course, this kitchen is also secured. The patients aren't allowed to enter. We don't want anyone to break out or commit suicide. I'd set the table with a young person. Then I went back into the kitchen. And suddenly there were titmice, one sitting on the coffee machine on the left and one on the board on the right. They chirped and chirped. And again there was this light. That's why I say Carl has been with me all my life. There is always this light around Carl, as if he is the mediator to this other world. I said, "My God, Grandma, what are you doing here? And Ammo, what are you doing here?" And I heard chirping, 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 as we had experienced in the garden. The birds flew up at once and also 4 times around me. Then I opened the window wide, and they flew into that beautiful morning sun. That was on the same day. Another colleague came and I said, "Do you know what I just experienced? Here was one titmouse sitting on the coffee machine and another one on the board." He looked at me. "Well, sure, but maybe you're a bit cuckoo." I was comforted and encouraged in my decision, which was the right one. It was very clear to me these were a sign. This was also an after-death contact.
That means you not only had one outstanding spiritual experience, but you've actually experienced such things again and again. To this very day?
Yes, right up to the present day. I currently work in the central emergency room in a large hospital in Hamburg. I enjoy that very much. We have a great team, also with the doctors. Team spirit is very important. We had an elderly patient. She was in her 96th year, most likely with gastric perforation, but the doctors had decided together with the relatives to do nothing more. I felt very sorry for her. I didn't want her to die alone and had discussed with the dear doctor, "I want to stay with her, hold her hand." "Yes, I think that's very good if you do that. We'll finish the morphine infusion." Then I was with Lieselotte and held her hand, comforted her. She was complaining of very severe pain. I raised the morphine infusion. I was allowed to do that. And suddenly I had the feeling that this glittering light was coming back. But I knew it wasn't Carl. It wasn't for me. It was a twinkling light at the window. Lieselotte was at the door, and there would have been another seat behind her. This light came to us from the other place. I was in awe because I really only knew my light, but now a light came for the patient. Then I said to Lieselotte, "Oh, Lieselotte, you are not alone." And then she said, "Oh, do you see him too?" I replied, "No, I don't see him, but I see the light and I feel him." She said, "This touches me so, it's been only 2 weeks. That's my piano teacher." I felt he must have been very strict once too, loving but strict. Then I felt the light coming closer and to the left side of Lieselotte. I wanted to sit down on a chair and thought, "No, I can't do that. Now the piano teacher is sitting there." The monitor was up, so I thought, all right, I can pull the monitor to the other side. The piano teacher was on Lieselotte's left side, and I was on her other side. I had a non-verbal, humorous communication with him. He signalled to me, "Yes, I am indeed the piano teacher. You think maybe your grandfather or your deceased husband is coming or something. But why is the piano teacher coming?" Then I said to Lieselotte, "That's remarkable." Lieselotte said to me, "I fell in love with him once." She must have been 16 or 17 at the time. To this chair, which was actually empty, I then said, "Oh, so now I'm even learning secrets." This dying process was embedded in a humorous piece. I thought, my God, yes, Carl was right. I have a destiny here. Again and again I am allowed to experience things like this. That is what touches me. I experience situations in which I am meant to be present. I'm definitely in this experience to give peace and confidence to other people and to take away fear. I think that is my main purpose as a nurse.
I'd like to come back to your near-death experience. You talked about it with your mother, so you always had someone to talk to. But when did you become aware that there was this term, near-death experience, for what you experienced?
As a very young nurse, I was about to take my state examination. It used to be customary that you had to have a so-called exam watch for the practical exam. You had an early shift, a late shift, and a night shift in the intensive care unit. And then you had to write a report about it. You had to put on the charts yourself, the medication, enter everything yourself. So you were responsible for one patient in the intensive care unit. It was assessed later. My patient was a man. He had had a heart attack but was already stable. I had thought, oh my God, this is boring. The way you think when you're young. Today I wouldn't think like that. But at that time I thought, nothing is happening at all. At that moment the monitor sounded the alarm. The patient went into ventricular fibrillation and had probably had a reinfarction. I was so frightened. And later still blamed myself for thinking such a thing. But I was then able to communicate again with Carl, who took away this guilty conscience years later. I'd marked my daily duties in green, blue and red. And in my excitement I had put the red Sharpie pen without a sleeve in my smock pocket. We had light blue tunics, so you could probably see that. We resuscitated the whole program, first with pressure, then defibrillator, everything. Great excitement. I had a lot of writing to do afterwards in my exam watch. Then the patient came back. He said to me, he came from the Bavarian region, "Hey, Mädel, you forgot to close the edding pen." I looked at him and asked in amazement, "How can you see that? You have cataracts." He said, "Do you want me to tell you something?" I replied, "Yes, please." He continued, "Pay attention. I've gone out of my body." This was new to me. I had my out-of-body experience with Carl as a child, and again every now and then, but this was my first patient who had told me something like this. He said, "You know, I flew out of my body, up there to the ceiling. There was a beautiful light." And I thought, light, I know it too. Then he looked at me for a long time. He probably wanted to see if I believed him. Then I said, "Yes, the light is beautiful." He said, "Do you know it?" And I answered, "Yes, I know the light." He told me, "That was so beautiful. I was flying through a tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, my mother came up to me and said, 'What are you doing here? Go back at once.'" That's what he said to me. I was 20 or 21 years old. It touched me greatly. He said, "I didn't want to go back at all. Now I can't see again." I also had my hair in a braid at that time and a scarf at the back. He described exactly how I looked. He saw that my edding pen had run out. He described exactly how he could see everywhere, even under the table, next to the table. He described that an instrument trolley was standing nearby, and that some instruments had fallen off, pushed away in a hurry. He described everything so precisely. That's what he experienced, and that's what made such an impression on me. And he said, "But this must remain between us." After this exam shift, I went home. It was a super exam session, by the way. I got an A for it. I came home and told my mother what I had experienced. She said, "Yes, of course there is. There is life after death." We really talked about it like adults. And she also told me her near-death experience when she had the embolism. For my exams, she gave me the books. Raymond Moody, who was the first to describe these near-death experiences in the 1970s. Extremely interesting. I devoured this book, also the follow-up book by him, and then Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, Understanding What Dying People Want to Say. Later, I had the experiences with the children, with Elisa, with the black balloon. My mother was incredibly understanding of my experiences. I don't know how else I could have dealt with it.
Would you say that your near-death experience actually shaped your whole life? Especially also the how to deal with people?
Absolutely. For me, the most important thing is love. My favourite phrase is from Paul: faith, love, hope, these three, but the greatest among them is love. And that is so, that has shaped me. I've also observed that the people from the world beyond always had a loving connection with a dying person. For example, the piano teacher. Why didn't Grandma or Grandpa come, but the piano teacher instead? Or with the dying children. For example, deceased friends with whom they had a special experience come to them. Love is simply the strongest force. I understand and know why I am here, simply to pass on love. You know, there is a sentence my mother once wrote in my poetry album, that I lovingly pass on to others the love from which I live. I want to write this in my heart and mind, that I am not on earth for myself, that I lovingly pass on to others the love from which I live. That is my motto in life.
Thank you, Ms. Ahmed, for telling us so openly about what you've been through, your experiences. Thank you very much for this interview.
It's been a pleasure.